Rain in Port Ardent doesn't just fall, it slants with the wind, needling through every gap in your coat. I was still at my desk in the tower, redlining a marina lease when Lena Vey's name lit up on my holo screen. Her projection flickered to life, pearl earrings, perfect posture, smile tuned to trust me. "Mara, sweetheart, your father and Corin would love to see you. Just a quiet dinner. No business talk, I promise." Behind me, Illy leaned in the doorway, jacket slung over his shoulder, travel case in hand. He was leaving for 10 days to oversee a pier reconstruction up north. His brow furrowed as soon as he heard her voice. "You know quiet dinner in their language means ambush," he murmured once the call muted on my end. I half smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Maybe, but if I refuse, they'll spin it into something worse." Illy stepped closer, resting his hands on the back of my chair. "Or maybe they'll just have to deal with a no for once." Lena's voice cut back in, warm as melted honey. "So, Friday, your father misses you." The pause between her words was deliberate, meant to press on old guilt like a bruise, and despite Illy's warning, I heard myself answer, "Fine, Friday night." Her smile sharpened almost imperceptibly. The call ended. The room felt colder. Illy shook his head, pulling me into a quick hug before he left. "Just don't let them get your signature or your peace." The elevator doors closed behind him, leaving me with the city's lights bleeding through the rain-streaked glass, and a feeling in my gut that I'd just agreed to step into a storm I couldn't control. Friday night draped the Vey estate in a kind of curated warmth, golden windows glowing against the black sweep of the harbor, like the house itself wanted you to believe it was safe inside. I pulled up the drive, rain ticking against the windshield. Illy's last message blinked in my console feed. "Don't sign anything. Call me if it turns sideways." I didn't reply, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew if I did, I might turn the car around. Inside, the air was too warm, scented with lemon glaze and roasted sea bass. The dining table was set as if for a magazine shoot, crystal glasses, polished silver, linen napkins folded into perfect arcs. Dorian sat at the head, one hand wrapped around a tumbler of dark liquor, his gaze unreadable but heavy. Corin lounged to his right, all teeth and charm, like a salesman who already thinks the deal is closed. Lena swept in from the kitchen, her silk dress whispering against the floor. "You made it, right on time." Dinner started politely enough. Corin rattled on about a revitalization project downtown. Lena described a charity gala she was too humble to mention. But halfway through the sea base, Corin slid a leather-bound folder across the table toward me. It landed with a dull thud, heavier than it should have been. "Go on, have a look." Inside, an adjustable-rate mortgage agreement, balloon payments crouched in the fine print like predators. I scanned the clauses, every one a potential noose. "What is this?" I asked. Corin leaned forward. "The bank just needs a guarantor. You're perfect. One signature, Mara, and we close next week." Dorian's voice followed, slow and deliberate. "Family takes care of family." I closed the folder, the leather warm from my hands. "And when the payments double, when the bank calls the note, you want me to drown with you." The air tightened. Corin's grin faltered. Lena's hand froze over her wine glass. Dorian leaned back, swirling his drink. "Careful, girl, that sounds like refusal." "It is." The silence that followed felt like the tide sucking back before a storm surge. And deep down, I knew they wouldn't let me leave this table without finding another way to drag me under. 2 nights later, my wrist console buzzed with Dorian's ID. No greeting, just his voice, flat, cold, the kind that had ended more arguments than it ever started. "X letter 1B0, letter 1EDF, and GTHUY letter 1EC1N. Tonight, we're settling this." I stared at the rain sliding down my window. "It's late, so is my patience." He hung up. A message popped up almost instantly from Illy, "Still at the office. Weather's bad, headed home soon." My fingers hovered over the reply. I typed, "Just wrapping up some things here." It wasn't a lie, just not the truth that mattered. The Old Vey shipyard crouched at the far edge of Port Ardent, where the seawall broke into open water. Its corrugated steel doors groaned as I pushed them open. Inside, the air was sharp with oil and salt, shadows pooling between half-built skiffs. Dorian stood by a workbench, one hand on a glass of something amber, the other resting on a ledger. Corin leaned in the doorway to the office, hands buried in his coat pockets, wearing that same smirk that used to get him out of trouble in school. "Sit," Dorian said, nodding at a low stool in the middle of the floor. I stayed standing. If this is about the mortgage, my answer's the same. He stepped forward, boots striking the concrete like punctuation. "You think you're above us, sitting in that glass tower, moving numbers around while your family fights to keep what's theirs." "I'm not above you," I said, keeping my voice level. "I just won't chain myself to a sinking hull." Corin laughed under his breath. She's always been dramatic. Dorian's eyes hardened into something I remembered from my childhood, the expression that meant there'd be no more words. "One signature, Mara, that's all. Or," I didn't let him finish, "or you'll prove exactly why I walked away in the first place." The shove came so fast, I barely registered the movement. My back slammed into a support beam. A white-hot crack tore through my shoulder. Before I could breathe, his fist caught my lip, the taste of iron blooming in my mouth. I dropped to my knees on the cold floor. Corin didn't move to help, just tilted his head, almost curious. "You did this to yourself." The slam of the office door echoed through the shipyard, leaving only the hiss of rain on the tin roof and the metallic taste flooding my mouth. My shoulder hung useless at my side, every breath a jolt of pain. I forced myself to roll over, palms scraping against the gritty concrete, knees dragging until the yawning dock door came into view. The night beyond was a sheet of black water and needle-sharp rain. Cold air punched into my lungs as I stepped outside. The pier swayed under me, boards slick and groaning. Across the gravel lot, the Vey house glowed like a beacon, warm, golden windows against the storm. My wrist console buzzed. "Illy, heading home, you okay?" I stared at the screen, fingers trembling, but the thought of trying to type with my arms screaming kept me moving. I'd answer once I was inside. I climbed the porch steps, each one harder than the last, and pounded on the cedar door. "Lena, it's me, open up." Inside, voices muffled, then silence. "Please, I'm hurt." My voice cracked in the wind. A shadow passed behind the frosted glass, pausing just long enough to let me hope. Then the faint click of the bolt sliding into place. My knees gave out. I sank onto the welcome mat, the one stitched with "Home always wins." Blood dripped onto the fabric, darkening the cheerful script. The sleet came harder now, biting into my skin. My console buzzed again. "Illy, Mara, talk to me." But my hands were too numb, my vision swimming. Somewhere down the pier, a buoy bell tolled. And there I stayed, inches from warmth, miles from safety, until a neighbor's voice cut through the storm. "Oh my God, Mara." "Mrs." Keen's footsteps pounded up the steps, her holo already dialing emergency. The last thing I saw before my vision gave way was the Vey door, shut tight, its light spilling past me onto the sleet. I woke to the antiseptic glow of Port Ardent General's recovery ward, shoulders strapped tight, lips stitched. The steady beep of the vitals monitor was the only thing cutting through the fog. The door slid open, and Lee was there, reins still on his coat, eyes sharp with worry. He dropped into the chair beside me, taking my good hand in both of his. "You didn't answer. I almost broke the speed limits getting back." I tried to smile, but it pulled at the stitches. "You weren't supposed to cancel your job for this." "Don't care. I saw it." He tapped his wrist console, projecting a grainy holo above the bed, my bloodied face on the shipyard floor, cropped tight so the impact was hidden. Corin's voice off camera, "She's having another episode." The caption read, "Please keep my sister in your thoughts. She's been unstable for a while." The lie hit harder than the punch. "They're making me look." Like you did this to yourself, Illy finished, jaw set. Not this time. Before I could answer, Juno Hales slipped in, carrying a paper bag of coffee. She'd been my best friend since college, the one who always knew which line I wouldn't cross. They're controlling the story, she said, sliding a cup toward me. You take it back. If I start yelling online, I'll look exactly like they want me to. Juno leaned forward. Not yelling, proving, we gather everything. This isn't family drama anymore, it's assault. And now it's defamation. Ali was already scrolling through his console. I can clean up low-light footage. That doc cam misses. Keen will make every frame clear enough to show what happened. That night back in my apartment, the three of us sat at my kitchen table. I opened a secure folder on my console and named it Evidence. First in, my medical report: dislocated left shoulder, blunt force trauma to the face, injuries inconsistent with self-infliction. Then, high-res photos of the bruises, stitches, swelling, every message from Corin, every group chat where Lena hinted I was unstable. Juno added the raw doc cam footage, Dorian storming out of the shipyard, Corin following. Then me, dragging my useless arm, blood visible even in monochrome, staggering toward the house that would not open. Illy watched the final export process, then slid the data chip across the table to me like it was a weapon. Now, he said quietly, you're armed. The Port Ardent courthouse sat like a block of gray stone against the skyline, rainwater streaking its columns. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wet coats, old paper, and burnt coffee. I sat at the plaintiff's table with my attorney, Callan Ward, the data chip in his hand like a loaded round. Illy was directly behind me in the front row, posture rigid, eyes locked on the defense table. Juno sat beside him, fingers drumming silently, as if daring anyone to look away from what they were about to see. Across the aisle, Dorian wore a perfectly cut suit, every button fastened like armor. Corin lounged next to him, scrolling his console as though this was a meeting he'd already decided not to care about. Lena sat 2 rows back, lips pressed into a thin smile, eyes trained on some distant point over my head. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge, silver hair, steel gaze, nodded for Callan to proceed. Your Honor, Callan said, holding up the chip. This contains medical reports, photographic evidence, social media postings, and third-party security footage relevant to the charges of assault and defamation. The first exhibit lit the holo screen. My hospital intake photo, swelling, stitches, bruises like storm clouds under my skin. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Then came the doc cam footage. Grainy at first, until Illy's enhancements sharpened every frame. The shipyard doors, Dorian emerging, Corin behind him. Me, dragging my arm, blood streaking my face, stumbling toward the Vey porch light which never opened. Gasps broke out in the room. Next, Corin's social media post hovered in the air. Please keep my sister in your thoughts. She's been unstable for a while, displayed beside the medical report stating injuries inconsistent with self-infliction. The judge's pen stilled mid-note. When it was my turn, I stood, the sling tight around my shoulder. My voice didn't shake. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to put my family on record. But when they close the door on you in a storm, you have 2 choices: keep bleeding for them or stop. I met Dorian's eyes. I stopped. The judge's ruling was swift. Dorian Vey guilty of assault. Corin Vey guilty of defamation. Permanent restraining orders for both. The gavel struck, sharp as a hull splitting from the dock. Illy's hand found mine before I'd even turned from the table, grounding me in a way that felt like the first real anchor I'd had in years. We stepped out of the courthouse into a sky finally breaking open, not with rain, but with light. The storm had blown itself out overnight, leaving Port Ardent washed clean. The harbor stretched ahead, masts swaying gently, gulls wheeling low over the tide. Illy was still holding my hand, thumb brushing the back of it like he was making sure I was really there. "So," he said quietly, "what now?" I looked back once at the gray bulk of the courthouse, at the place where the Vey name had been stripped of its weight. Then I faced forward. Now I stopped knocking on closed doors. When we got back to my apartment, the first thing I saw was the old family crest still hanging by the entry. For years it had been a talisman I couldn't bring myself to take down, some stubborn hope that one day it would mean safety again. I lifted it off the wall, set it in a box, and shoved it into the back of the hall closet. In its place, I hung the gift Illy had given me months ago, a wide brass ship's key on a velvet cord. "What's it open?" he'd asked when he gave it to me. "Anything I want," I'd said. Now the key caught the afternoon light, gleaming like a quiet victory. Juno arrived not long after, 3 paper cups of coffee in hand. She took one look at the empty space where the crest had been and grinned. "Feels lighter in here already." We settled by the window, watching the tide roll in, the 3 of us sharing the kind of silence that isn't empty but earned. For the first time, I wasn't standing outside, shivering in the storm, waiting for someone else to let me in. I was inside because I'd built the door myself, and the people I chose were already here, keeping it open. And I held the only key.